Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here, and unless you've been living under a rock, it's pretty hard to ignore all the consistent real estate related headlines that are popping up these days. You've got headlines like this saying home prices to drop, new report predicts, and even Toronto and Vancouver won't be immune. And immigration shortfalls from COVID-19 may spell short-term gain, but long-term pain for housing market. And even reports of Canadian real estate buyers trying to walk away from purchases, and it's becoming rampant. And down here it says, yeah, that Toronto real estate buyers are ghosting sellers, so they're just not responding even after they've submitted an offer. And for a lot of younger adults and millennials, this feels like the moment they've been waiting for. It's not a secret that in many markets in Canada, the home prices have been going crazy. In most of the past few years, we've seen consistent increases in home prices, and for a lot of people it's been discouraging, thinking, oh man, the market keeps on going up, I'm never going to be able to buy a home. So when headlines like this come out, people start thinking, oh my gosh, this could be the crash that I've been waiting for to finally get in. But despite all this negative information, we keep on seeing the prices go up in most markets in Canada. In today's video, we're going to cover exactly why the market's behaving in the way it is, if there's going to be a crash in 2021, and what you can do if you're in the place that you're thinking about buying soon. But before we dive right into it, if you're new to the channel, hey, how's it going? It's nice to meet you. My name is Russell and I post videos about Canadians and their money. The overall goal is to get information to Canadians as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible so that they can set themselves up to live a more financially stable future. Anytime there's any news or updates that could affect you and your family's money, you're going to hear about it here first. If any of that sounds interesting to you, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And while you're down there, hit that like button and turn it blue, because when you do, hundreds of people who wouldn't have otherwise seen this video get to see it, and it could be information that they're looking for. Thanks so much for doing that. Now let's dive into exactly what's happening here. When it comes to the Canadian real estate market, there are two areas that you can take a look at. First, you can look at the national perspective. This covers all of the areas that would affect the entire country. This could include changes like interest rate numbers, or the job stats in Canada, or maybe even immigration targets that we've been putting into place. These are all things that are going to affect the economy and as a result affect the housing market everywhere in the country. Then you can narrow it down a little bit more to each individual local market. Based on a number of factors for that individual local market, you could see something different than the overall Canadian outlook. But let's start with a quick look at the national perspective and what things are changing that could be having an effect on the market. The first major factor that affects everyone in Canada is where the current interest rates are. You probably already know that when most Canadians buy a house, they're doing so with a mortgage. The bank is lending them money to buy the house, and they're charging an interest rate on this money so that they can make a little bit of a profit. When these interest rates are high, people's monthly mortgage payments go up. And of course, the inverse of that, when the interest rates are low, those monthly payments go down. So as a result, if interest rates go up, then you can afford less home because your payments will be higher, and the way you're qualified for the mortgage in the first place is what you could feasibly pay on a month-by-month basis for your mortgage. And if rates go down, then that lowers your monthly payment, allowing you to buy a more expensive house because of the way that you're qualified for that mortgage. Because of this, it makes sense that when interest rates go up, we see less home sales, and when interest rates go down, we see more. As interest rates lower, people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford a home in their market are now able to, and they're added to the buyer pool. Because real estate works like all other markets in a supply and demand sort of way, when you add more demand and more buyers, and there's the same amount of supply, that's going to drive prices up. That's why it's so important to look at interest rates in a time like this to sort of forecast what's going to happen in the market. And who controls what those interest rates are? That's the Bank of Canada. And I'm simplifying it a little bit, but essentially the Bank of Canada goes out and tells all the other banks like your RBCs, your CIBCs, your BMO, they say to them, hey, we want you to lend money at this rate for the next little while. Then those banks pass on that rate to the consumer in multiple different products, whether it's a mortgage or a high interest savings account or various other accounts that would pay interest. So when the global health crisis hit, the Bank of Canada lowered its rates and lowered its rates and lowered its rates some more. Their idea is that when they lower the rates, it stimulates the economy because it encourages more people to borrow money and to spend it and to consistently use it and move it around. So we need to look at what's going to happen with these interest rates in the future. If the interest rates go up, then we could see a huge fall in house prices. But if they stay the same at their current low rates, we're probably going to see it stay the same. But recently on October 28th, the Bank of Canada announced that it was planning to keep its interest rates near zero until 2023. And they made that decision based on the assumptions that there won't be any more widespread lockdowns and that there will be a vaccine by 2022. So this is some very important information to have, because from what we know about interest rates, when they keep them low, it increases the amount of people trying to buy and buying into the market, so we could expect to see prices stay the same. But interest rates aren't the only thing that affect the national real estate outlook. Low interest rates don't mean much if people are unemployed, aren't working, and as a result can't afford a mortgage. This is one of the things I hear most consistently. How is this increased unemployment in Canada going to affect the real estate market? We all know that when COVID hit, so many people were out of work or were laid off. And if this higher unemployment were to have continued, maybe there would have been a decrease in prices because, again, there would be less buyers in the buyer pool, and that supply and demand balance would be offset. So let's take a look at this Canadian unemployment rate and see what's happened. So this was all pre-COVID. We go over here and now this is getting to March and then to April, and we see a quick spike in unemployment rates. It seems like we maxed out so far at 13.7%. Although we have been seeing the Canadian job market recover more quickly than was originally expected. Since that peak in May, we're down almost 5% from the worst case scenario that was that last current peak. Now, if there are no more huge lockdowns, we could see further recovery in this chart going down and down and down further back to our original levels of that 5.5, 5.6%. So this is an area that's really going to depend on what happens with the COVID situation in this second wave that we're starting to see. If that unemployment rate goes down, that could increase home prices, but if we see it spike back up, it could have a negative impact on the home prices, lowering them down even further. And somehow my art just slipped down and hit the floor and shattered glass, so I'm going to clean that up, and I just wanted to tell you why there wasn't art there anymore. Okay, now that that mess is cleaned up, I guess I'll just lean it here. Okay, so where were we? That's right, it was unemployment rates. Unemployment rates and interest rates aren't the only thing that affects supply and demand on a national level, though. Another big driver of this supply and demand relationship is immigration into the country. As population increases in any way, be it immigration or natural population growth, we're going to see home prices increase as more and more people need a place to live. And historically, Canada has had relatively high immigration rates. Now, this immigration conversation does affect different areas of the country differently. Areas that see more immigrants settling down in the area, such as Toronto, are going to see more of an effect from this in terms of increased home prices. But with COVID, how is immigration going to change? In 2020, we've seen a decrease in the amount of immigration in Canada. This is largely due to the border restrictions and the travel restrictions that have been placed everywhere in the world due to the global health crisis. But the government announced on October 30th that they plan to bring in more than 1.2 million immigrants in the next 3 years. And of course, some people are saying that these sort of targets aren't really realistic because of the border closures that are still ongoing, and it kind of assumes that they're going to open up more. Let's take a listen to what the immigration minister for the government says to see if he has any more information.
It's no secret that the pandemic has made moving around the world a lot harder.
We hope that we will be at least at half of our overall target for 2020, and we look forward to making up for lost time going forward.
Ottawa hoped to bring in about 700,000 immigrants over the next couple of years. Now it will invite an extra 50,000 in each of the next 3 years.
Wow, okay, so that's a good chart. Let's pause on that. As opposed to these numbers, which were the plan before the pandemic, now if we let it go,
an extra 50,000.
Yeah, this is the number that we're going to see in the future. So that's a pretty significant increase in immigration. This could certainly result in an increase in demand, especially in those major metropolitan areas. But at that point, we're getting a little bit farther away from the national perspective. So now seems like a good time to jump into the local perspective and how that can affect individual markets. COVID has had a dramatic effect on a lot of different markets across the country. And again, it's all controlled by this basic supply and demand. One major factor that can affect local markets is that city's rent price. The reason rent so heavily affects home prices is because of investors. When investors buy a property, it's their intent to make some money on it. If rent is high, they'll have enough money to cover the mortgage and to cover all of the other expenses that go along with owning a property. But on the flip side, as rent goes down, they could pass that threshold of breaking even and end up having to put money in every month to their property instead of making money on it. This causes a lot of investors to panic because when they're not making money, it's not really a good investment anymore. So we'll see an increased number of investors trying to sell off their property when rent numbers go below that threshold. When we take a look at rentals.ca, which is a great website for getting stats on rental numbers across Canada, we see that for their October 2020 rent report, they're going to tell us about September. They say that it was an average of $1,769 per month, and that's down 9.5% annually. And the average rent has been nearly identical over the last 4 months, between $1,769 and $1,771. Despite that rate sort of averaging out over the past few months, this 10% decrease could have a huge effect on certain markets. We're seeing a large decrease in rent in areas that are heavily supported by schools. As more and more universities and colleges transfer to an entirely digital curriculum, it'll mean that less and less people need to be renting in the city that they're going to school in. As an example, let's look at the downtown Toronto market. This has been the perfect storm for downtown Toronto condos to go down in value. Schools have gone digital, so there's less people studying at the universities in town. Plus, we're seeing an influx of more and more people leaving the city because they no longer need to be downtown to work because they're not working in person anymore. They're just calling in on Zoom when they need to. I mean, just take a look at this chart. This is something from the Toronto Real Estate Board. They gave us this data on over 200 different home sales, and you can see these arrows. They're marking where people are moving from Toronto. So you can see this vast number of arrows pointing out and away from the city, and that indicates that more and more people are moving away. With people able to work from home and more reasonable prices just outside in that outer ring of the city, it's starting to make sense for people to sell downtown and move to the outer ring. As a result, we've seen homes and properties in this downtown core that used to be so expensive dropping in value, while the outside communities like the Durham region or Oakville or these sort of areas that are a little bit removed from the downtown core, we're seeing those prices increase dramatically. So these type of local effects happen to each individual community differently. Going even further than that, it's not just a migration away from the cities that's causing these different changing local market conditions. We talked about how unemployment is going down across Canada on a national level, but this doesn't speak to the individual little markets that are seeing increased unemployment still. For example, many markets in Alberta, like Calgary, where there's a higher unemployment number, are seeing drastic decreases in the prices of their homes. Since this area's economy is so heavily based on the oil and energy industry, and that industry hasn't been doing so well, we're seeing a decrease in home prices because of that increased unemployment from those struggling industries. This just goes to show that you can look at national stats all you want, but when it comes down to it, your individual local market is going to be different from every other local market in Canada. So if you want to get a good idea of what the market's going to do in your area, your best place to start is on that local market and taking a look at all the things we've talked about, and then considering the national changes like the interest rates and immigration rates and national unemployment, and using that to sort of augment what you find when you're looking at your individual market. So will there be a huge market crash in 2021? The truth is, nobody knows for sure. I wish I had some sort of magic crystal ball that I could look into and let you know exactly what's going to happen. But the best we can do is take a look at these stats and take a look at this information and try to come to our best educated guess. But all of these stats and all of these numbers are far less important than actually following the fundamentals when you decide to buy a home. If you buy a house that you can afford and you're buying it for the long term, I think it's a good time to buy always. There are so many people who have money in their hand and are waiting on the sidelines to jump in when the market crashes, but if they never see the market crash that they were looking for, they're just missing out on years and years of owning a home and potentially seeing it appreciate. But if you're buying a home where the numbers make sense and you can afford it and you have the income to afford it and you have a large emergency fund ready in case you lose your job, then it makes sense to buy now, and as long as you're holding for the long term, 10 years plus, then you should be able to weather any storm that the market throws at you. And if you want to be even more safe and even more efficient about it, I'd really recommend taking a look at a home that you can use to generate some income additionally. This is the strategy that I use, where I live in one portion of my house and I rent out the rest of it, and that helps me dramatically with my mortgage payments and increases the amount I have to spend on myself monthly by huge amounts. If my house dropped 30% in value tomorrow, I would be fine because I know that I can make enough money to make that mortgage payment each and every month, and I can hold on to it long enough to wait out the storm. Plus, because I've taken this aggressive approach at reducing my living expenses, I'm able to invest a far higher percentage of my income. But that's getting into a topic for another video. But I want to know what you have to say about all of this. Based on the information we've gone over today, do you think that there's going to be this 2021 market crash, or do you think that house prices are going to continue to go up? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit that like button, because when you do, it spreads this video to people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to find it. I would definitely appreciate your help in growing the channel, and I'm sure the people who are looking for this information would appreciate it as well. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. I'm coming out with updates just like this consistently, so you're bound to learn something new sometime. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video has helped you out, made you think a little bit, and I'll see you next time.